Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. So like Lizzie just said, Shen, Lizzie and I are going to present today our research on Australian young people's careers and skills, inequalities in both envisaged futures and attainment. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the ancestors, elders and families of the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri and the Wurundjeri of the Kulin people who are the traditional owners and custodians of university land. As we share our own knowledge practices within the university, may we pay our respect to the deep knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal community and their ownership of country. So we are based at the Centre for International Research on Education Systems, or CIRES, which is a part of Victoria University, and the next few slides will just cover a brief range of research activities that we undertake at the centre. So our focus at CIRES is on identifying how well education systems work, for whom, and how they can be improved to work well for all. We have 7 research staff from level A to level E, plus a centre manager, and we undertake research across all ages and education types, from early childhood and care through primary and secondary school to tertiary vocational education and higher education. And our approach is to undertake both contract and academic research. We've got 6 key research areas that we undertake research in, but they're not exclusive to these areas. So we look at the performance of Australia's education and training system. We do a lot of work around school funding to improve educational outcomes for all students. And we look at improving transitions from work to school and further education, looking at enablers and also barriers to student success in those transitions. We undertake some international comparisons of policy and practice in relation to school funding models, approaches to senior and secondary school, for example. And we focus on measuring the success of educational reform and innovation by taking deep qualitative and quantitative analysis and field work. And ultimately, our goal is to understand the causes of and to try to come up with some solutions to educational inequality. So in terms of the presentation today, I'm going to talk you through some of the research aims and also the literature. Then we will have Shen go through the methodology in a bit more detail. She's going to walk you through the key findings. And then Lizzie will provide some context and link our key findings to some of the broader implications. So in terms of the very, very broad literature on students' aspirations, a lot of which has already been covered already, it's not surprising that students generally have high aspirations, usually linked to socioeconomic background. They're usually gendered, as in as what has been found in the most recent research has come from the OECD in terms of students' dream jobs across different OECD countries. The 10 most common jobs aspired to people are very pervasive. You know, you get doctors, lawyers, engineers, business managers and teachers, and a lot of these aspirations require university degrees rather than technical or vocational or further education skills. There's not many trades, and there's quite this fixed notion of heading to university, getting that professional job. And there's a narrowness to aspirations that is quite pervasive. Studies pre-COVID also suggest social inequalities in terms of who attains their dream jobs. And there's variation in some of the findings, but the general finding is that the higher socioeconomic background, the more likely that you'll attain the job that you aspire to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So Our research has two key aims. The first is to investigate the aspirations of Australian young people as related to job skill levels and their occupational attainment as young adults. So there's lots of different ways to measure aspirations, whether you look at students' exact jobs that they aspire to, or, you know, like some studies, they convert those jobs into various hierarchies of job according to job status. Other studies look at professional aspirations versus non-professional aspirations. And where our research differs to these approaches is that we look at the skill levels, which means that we look at the types of qualifications and skill levels that are required to do the jobs that students aspire to. And we came up with a 3-tier framework to analyse students' aspirations. So we looked at high-level skills, those skills that require a degree, at advanced diploma or above, medium skill levels, which in the Australian context speaks to certificate 4s and diplomas, and also low-level skills, which are your certificates 1, 2s and 3s. And so we explored the degree to which students' aspirations at age 16 relate to their occupational status attainment. And you'll hear Shen talk more about these high, medium and low skill levels. And the second research aim is to explore whether the relationship between aspirations and occupational attainment is influenced by socioeconomic background, as well as a range of other factors such as gender, First Nations status, and English language status. So I'll pass over to Shen now to talk a bit more in depth about the data and the findings.
You're on mute, Shen.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. For our this work, we used two main data sources. One is the LSAY, which is the previous presenters have already mentioned. So I'm just not going to talk too much about the survey itself. So far for this survey program, the national survey programs, there's several cohorts have commenced or either completed their survey programs. For our study, we used data collected for the 2009 cohorts of 15-year-old because they have just recently completed their full circle of the survey program, which is ended in 2019. So by using this data set, we're able to link the school early career aspirations in school at age 15, and also linking to the job or occupation outcome at age 25. 25 years when most of them completed higher education or training, complete the post school training. So in the employments. The other data set is the Australian Census population and housing. We're using this data set mainly looking at the labor market outcomes for the 30 years old in Australia. So for a reference point, comparing the aspirations of the 15-year-old for the, for the future jobs. As we know that just like any other longitudinal survey, LSAY has a limitation regarding its higher attrition rates. The beginning over 15,000 students commenced in the PISA study. By age 25, we got less than about 30% of the participants left. But for this study, we are mostly using a descriptive analysis. So we are trying to use all the longitudinal weights, survey weights to do some adjustment or correction. So I think the potential issue for the attrition is that you might have under a biased estimate for some particular vulnerable group, for the students from low socioeconomic background or indigenous students, for example. So I think that for that particular picture, that the projects just did by presented by Smith's family and her team probably covered that particular cohort, what it looked like. Move next, Melissa, thank you. So we were just presenting some highlights using the data from these two data sources. So the first one, we looking by using the survey data, we can looking at the data collected when they age 15, where the students were asked what's their aspiration for what job they want to do when they age 30. So the data are collected quite detailed level, students just naming a job. So the data were coded by using the Australian and New Zealand standard classification of occupation at 2 digits level. But as you understand, the specific level occupation student reported the sample numbers are quite small. So what we did is we grouped them into associated skill levels for each occupation they reported. And then in there, we further group up into 3 categories. For example, these jobs are associated with lower skills and medium skill levels and high skill levels. For example, for the high skill level jobs, normally generally you require a bachelor degrees or higher, and then you require 3 to 5 years working experience. For the lowest skill level jobs, probably you need a certificate 3 or below or no post-school education. And for this comparison, we're also looking at the census data on the left panel to compare to the matched cohort data. So, the census in 2016, this is the distribution of jobs by skill level. You can see in 2016. And then on the right hand of the column is what students aspired for. So the general finding is that we know we all recognize aspiration is really important. That for the later career outcome, or for the key driver in study and so on. But one thing is that we can find that the aspirations is much higher than the reality. So that's coming into a question, actually echoing with a lot of findings we have been shown by the previous presenters, that saying, if the career advice should be more alignment with the labor market, regardless what it is, and if the aspirations be too narrow, what kind of career available to students. If students only focusing on the professional level skills, and the labor market is not the same. So we can see like 73%, nearly 3/4 of them wanted a job in the higher skill level. Basically, it's a professional level or above, managerial kind of jobs. But in the labor market, only 50% of 30 years old are employed in this sort of jobs with similar skills. And the medium level, occupation, as we're talking about, is getting quite, broad area, 70%. And only small percent, very small percentage, 5%, aiming for lower skill levels for all the cohorts. So next one. By using the LSAY data, we're also able to looking at the students' career aspirations based on the socioeconomic background and also the academic performance. As a lot of presenter pointing out that the social inequality in here. So for this chart, you can see that I group the students by the performance category: low performing, average performing, and then high performing. That's use the PISA rating result by different proficiency levels. And then we group the students based on the family background, SES background, which is with 4 quantiles. On the column, we're looking at the distribution of the type of job they aspire for by skill levels groups. So, low level, medium level, and high level type of jobs they aspired for. A general pattern you can see, regardless of the performance levels, low ICS students, the aspiration is much lower than the high ICS students. And even for the high performing categories, the gradients, social gradients or performance gradients are flatter, but it still exist. And then if you look at the medium levels, that's quite steep in there. For the medium performers, right, the low SES kids are less likely to aiming for highly skilled jobs than the high SES kids. And this is highlighting the social inequalities in young people's aspiration very early on. So the last key highlight we have for our research is we are able to link the students' aspirations at age of 15 years to the job outcomes or the type of occupation they were employed in 11 years later when they age 25 years. So we sort of match the jobs by the skill types or skill levels, what they aspired for, and then what actually the job they have. So you can see that there's 3 category matching result. One is the job skill levels are lower than they aspired for, and the job skill levels are the same than they aspired for, and the one higher than what they aspired for early on. I think using job category to matching rather than occupation, because we're recognizing the small limitation of the samples. And also there's a lot of jobs have transferable skills, right? You can't train for something, you end up do something else. But the important thing is the skill levels you can have or you attend. So we also looking at the differences by their social economic backgrounds. So we can clearly see that, the low SES kids, for example, the quantile 1, SES quantile 1 kids, family in the quantile 1 are less likely to achieve whatever they aimed for, in terms of skill levels, skill level of their jobs. And the high SES kids are more likely to be employed in the job they aspire for, or even higher, so that the skill levels are even higher. This is given we know in the previous slides that the aspirations for the disadvantaged students, the aspirations already lower early on. And then you look at the attainment of their jobs or aspirations, and they even lower 10 years later. So that's also really echoing all the funding saying, we do need to think about how we can better support the disadvantaged students in schools. One is how we can work with them, set up the career aspiration, working towards it, and also a proper support to be able to attain their dreams, to make the dream come true. I think, the last comment I want to make is that we're also looking at other, the family background. We also, apart from the social economic background, we also look at the indigenous background, and students from non-English speaking background, and students from non-metropolitan areas. And because of the attrition issues, and the results are not statistically significant. But there is some patterns also we can see, we can observe those disadvantaged people, students from these disadvantaged groups are less likely to achieve they dream jobs, and similar to the other low students from the low socioeconomic backgrounds.
Thanks so much, Shannon. I think I'll take over now, but it's such rich data. I'm just going to speak a little bit as a researcher and as a professional career practitioner and just dig into what we can do with career development practice to think about some of these problems and think about trying to start overturning some of these systemic inequalities. I think the my sort of taking from this research, it underscores the importance of thinking about disadvantage and thinking about it different ways. And I think looking at how both aspirations can be formed and influenced by socioeconomic background, and also then achievements very useful. I think career practice has been cast in the last sort of 20 or so years in terms of widening participation to higher education. We've heard that several times this evening. And I think that we've had a focus on highly skilled occupational information, raising aspirations, thinking about higher education, and we perhaps can see some of the activities that have come from that and what's happened, that aspirations have been certainly raised. However, I think we need to talk about now contextualized understandings about how to use career information at all different levels. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about that. Thanks, Melissa. So I think going back to opportunity awareness is a key part of Laura Watts' 1979 DOTS model for career development. As you know, Tristram Hooley wrote about in the Tony Watts Reader, we need to really broadly understand that opportunity awareness is not just lickety-split getting to the top and one particular aspiration, but it's also about understanding your choices and the ranges of opportunities that can be open to you, and broadening and making more equitable access to career information, as Dawn spoke about in the first session. I think we need to start talking about horizontal diversity and how the world of work works, and thinking about how different occupations need to be talked about in different contexts and different industries, not focusing on singular occupations. So just moving to our last slide. This is a vision I hope we can stay with you, is that often we see these pencils as, we think of them as a row of different colours of different choices, and that's how I would visualise and like to see career opportunities. However, over the last few years, perhaps we've, in terms of to raise aspirations, we've seen it a little bit like a mountain slope, like these pencils. I think we should support students in our practice and our work to have wider access to information, and universal quality career education within the curriculum compulsory settings is important, supported by strong labour market information, supported by quality career professional counselling, and also well supported career conversations with parents and influencers is so important to thinking about making sure that people can make aspirations that suit them, and that they are making aspirations from a wide choice of information. So that's our presentation today, and this is just one last slide to say thank you, good night from Melbourne.